The country's economy is struggling, we know that, and we are gripped by a crisis of unemployment. And many believe the tourism industry could be a silver lining that we need to boost the economy. SA Tourism Chief Executive Officer Sisa Nchona believes it's time to make tourism what is termed a primary growth pillar. Marketing management and nation-building consultant Paul Bannister now joins us via Skype to put some flesh on the bones of the story. Paul Bannister, good evening to you. You know, we've heard this argument so many times before that we should be capitalizing on tourism, and yet we don't. And you write today that we put self-inflicted barriers in the way. What are those barriers?
Well, if we go through the initial barrier, the historical barrier of visas and the whole unabridged birth certificates, and try and put that to one side, although we must ask the question, why aren't we accessible to more high-spending markets? But that's an issue which we could move past. The next barrier we've really got to look at is the situation of lawlessness and personal security. Because when you interview people as to why they are hesitant about coming to South Africa, there is now a genuine fear, and of course it's exacerbated by the media coverage of what's going on in South Africa on our streets. So lawlessness is probably the second one. We then have issues such as the availability of electricity. We had the day zero situation, which was meant to reduce consumption, which it did successfully in Cape Town, but imagining that the world consisted only of talking to Cape Townians, whereas in fact that got onto CNN. So those are the type of things that we're talking about. And as I said in the article this morning, many of these barriers cannot be overcome by tourism alone. The Department of Tourism has to work as a collective with the other departments. It's like back to in the early 2000s when Minister Bali Moosa was there, and he would literally say at Cabinet each fortnight, what has your department done for tourism this last week? We need to get back to that.
Do you think we can, or do you think that you've listed so many obstacles that in many ways it's a lost cause?
No, it's never a lost cause. I mean, the fact of the matter is the country still pulls an enormous number of tourists into it by nature of the beauty, the people, the culture, the history, the dynamism of the country. People want to come here. So that is there. And curiously, the coronavirus might actually give us a similar type of bonus as we received at the end of 2001 after 9/11, when a lot of people that were going to go to the States came south. We might actually find a short-term bonus, which we need, because things like Day Zero and the visa campaign really stultified our growth for the last couple of years.
I'm going to assume that you'll agree with me when I say that the unabridged birth certificate row was a major setback. You say that we now need to focus aggressively on negotiating mutual visa agreements with other countries, preferably high tourist quality nations. How do we do that? Are we doing it? And who should we be talking to?
Well, there seems to be a little bit of a misfit sometimes between the utterings of the Department of International Relationships, DIRCO as it is, and the tourism markets that we need to talk to. So we appear to be slightly out of kilter with the markets that we're talking to. But even in the markets we are talking to, we have barriers, which some people can get a 30-day visa, other people can get a 90-day visa. And there's a classic situation where South Africa has a lot of what we call swallows. They come here to avoid the Northern Hemisphere winter, but they can only come for 90 days. They can extend their visa when they're here, but that means they've got to change their flights. A simple touch of the pen would turn that 90 days into 180 days and would generate a whole lot more sort of tourism income to the country. So I think we haven't got over the visa situation. The other thing with visas, I know it sounds bizarre, but tourists don't think about geopolitical boundaries. They think in terms of features, attractions. Americans probably want to go to the Okavango as well as go to Cape Town and maybe the Kruger. Chinese people, Asian people want to go to Sun City, but they equally want to go to Victoria Falls. We have to understand that we actually need a SADC visa as well to make that mobility between countries easy. 10 years ago at Indaba, it was the subject of conversation, but it didn't happen.
Moreover, Paul Bannister, you also suggest that we need to create a tourism culture in South Africa that starts with all of us being tourists in our own country. Fair point, I accept that, but times are hard.
Times are very, very hard. And if you look at all the world's successful tourism economies, you'll find domestic tourism is a major driver because what it does, it complements the internationals. So, for example, domestic tourists go out of season not only in school holidays. Domestic tourists also go to the places that the first-time tourists to the country don't get to. So it's important in addressing the two shortcomings of a tourism economy, which is seasonality and geographic penetration of the market. And the joy of tourism is it can generate jobs in rural areas. So we have to begin to drive domestic tourism more substantially. One of the problems that we have is that I don't think, even though we've had for many years a campaign called Short Left, I don't think we've necessarily had products that actually, it's almost like if you recall, after World War II and all the soldiers came back from the war in Europe and whatever, and particularly in the UK, they set up a thing called Butlins Holiday Camp and Pontins Holiday Camp, which organized people's leisure for them. They went to the seaside for a week and everything was organized. I think we have to think hard about the fact that a lot of people that come from a rural background, might be now living in the cities, don't have a mindset of actually enjoying leisure for what it is. And it's a very necessary complement to a hard-working situation. We need to think about that product, whether we have those things.
Just a final one. You've mentioned the impediments. So we've dealt with the unabridged birth certificates. You've spoken about crime. You've spoken about electricity. But are we not, for many international tourists, Paul Bannister, simply a kilometre too far? Are we not always going to be held hostage by long-haul distance?
You know, that's an interesting terminology. I've just done a trip to New Zealand. Trust me, that's a long haul. What you've got for a lot of visitors to South Africa, particularly on a north-south sort of horizon, it's an uncomfortable overnight. And as a consequence of which, you just get over that pretty quickly if you're in the same time zone. It's more challenging if you come from the Americas. It's more challenging if you come from Asia. But I think we should also stop using the term long haul. We should start talking about overnighting and getting those people into us. But also as well, don't forget, we've got a lot of people coming from Africa and the Middle East. And that's a market which I think we haven't really got to grips with either, for which it's a much shorter flight. You know, we're 4 hours, 3.5 hours from Nairobi.
Spoken like a true ad man wanting to turn long haul into overnighting. Paul Bannister, thank you very much for joining us. He is an expert in nation branding, live to us via Skype.